Today we're going to look at section 5.2. We're going to use various methods to prove parallel lines. So remember, if we're trying to prove parallel lines, we're not assuming them, so we have to figure out, do we have some kind of relationship of congruent angles or supplementary angles based off of all of those new vocabulary angles? So alternate interior, alternate exterior, corresponding, same side interior, same side exterior. So in this problem, asking are the lines A and B parallel, we need to look to see what kind of equation can I set up to solve for x. Well, that will then allow me to determine whether or not I have congruent or supplementary angles. Now remember, we cannot assume that certain angles are congruent or supplementary. So in this picture, even though 5x minus 15 and 4x plus 1 are alternate interior, because I don't know that the lines are parallel, I cannot assume that they're congruent. So the only thing that we can absolutely assume from this picture are these two angles right here. Notice that they are vertical, and vertical angles are congruent. So that's how I'm going to then set up an equation to solve for x. So solving for x, I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides. I will then add 15. That gives me 2x to equal 32. And then dividing by 2, I'll get x to be 16. So now that I know what x is, I want to figure out, do I have a relationship with complementary or supplementary angles? So like I kind of mentioned, the two angles that we're going to want to focus on are these alternate interior angles. So in order for us to have parallel lines, those alternate interior angles have to be congruent. So now that I know that x is 16, I'm going to substitute 16 in to both of those expressions. Oops. All right, so let's determine if these are equal. So 5 times 16 is going to give us 80. When I subtract 15, I'll get a 65-degree angle. Well, 4 times 16 is 64. When I add 1, I'll get a 65-degree angle. So because I know that those are alternate interior and I have now congruent angles, are these lines parallel? I'm going to say yes. And this is because when alternate interior angles are congruent, that then gives us parallel lines. All right, so remember we talked about crook problems yesterday. So if I give us parallel lines, notice that I do not just have one transversal that goes through both of them. I've got this angle inside the parallel lines where this point right here, I can always draw in a third line that would then be parallel to the two lines that were given. That splits angle 1 up into two different angles, this angle and this angle. I don't know that those angles are congruent, but I can figure out the measure of both of those angles, and then I can determine by adding them together what the measure of angle 1 is. So if I focus on the top two parallel lines, I see that I've got the angle that I want is inside with the 114. They're on the same side. These are same side supplementary angles. So if I subtract 114 from 180, that tells me that this top angle is a 66-degree angle. Then if I look at the bottom two parallel lines, I see that the angle that I want is interior. The angle that is given, that 33 degrees, is interior. They are on opposite sides. They are alternate interior, which means that those are congruent. So the measure of angle 1 would be me adding 66 and 33 together. So it looks like we have a 99-degree angle. Same idea in part B. If I know that the line A is parallel to the line B, but there's no one transversal, I take the angle at the vertex and I can draw one more parallel line So now I have 3 parallel lines, which means I want to find this angle and this angle. I don't know that those 2 angles are congruent, but by focusing on the top 2 parallel lines, I see that the 82-degree angle that is given to us is interior. The angle that I want is interior. These are alternate interior, which makes them congruent. So that top angle is 82 degrees. If I look then at the bottom 2 lines, I see that I've got the angle that I want is inside and the angle that is given is outside. They are on the same side of the transversal. These are corresponding angles, and corresponding angles are congruent. So that has to be 21 degrees as well. So then the measure of angle 1 is me adding the 2 angles together. So adding those 2 together gives me a 103-degree angle. All right, so given this big diagram right here, I know it looks intense, but we just have to take it piece by piece. It's talking about the measure of angle 9 being 74 degrees. So angle 9 is right here. It says the measure of angle 15 is also 74 degrees. So these are congruent. It wants to know what 2 lines are parallel. Well, notice that because those 2 angles share this line, that means B has to be the transversal. So what are the 2 lines that are forming the other 2 parts of the angle? Well, notice that that would be this line right here and this line right here. Those would be then line X and line Y, and they're parallel. So why do I know that? Well, notice that these 2 angles are congruent. Notice that the angles are inside the 2 lines that I want to be parallel. They are on opposite sides of the transversal. So these are alternate interior angles. And because we were given that they are congruent, that is what allows us to conclude that we have parallel lines. Okay, let's take a look at the second problem. It says we know that angle 24, which is right here, is 93 degrees. Angle 19, which is over here, is 87 degrees. So notice the 2 angles that I gave us are definitely not congruent. The line that helps form both of those is this line Y. So what are the other 2 lines that form the angles? Well, 24 is also made up of line A. Line C helps make angle 19. So that means that we want line A and line C to be parallel. But my question is, why do I know that they're parallel? They're not congruent angles. Notice that if I add 93 and 87 together, that's going to give me 180. So these angles are supplementary. Notice that with that line Y, which is my transversal, they're on the same side. Okay, so it's same side. These are outside of those 2 lines we want parallel. So these are same side exterior. So when we have same side exterior angles that are supplementary, that is what's going to allow us to conclude parallel lines. Okay, so that's us using various methods to prove lines